I'm very, very happy to be here. It's, like I said, it's a real honor. And I'm grateful in the midst of very turbulent times to be having the opportunity to focus on and speak about fear today. So much of the difficulty we experience in the world is rooted in fear, in my experience. I'm glad to be here today with all of you. I'm also so grateful for, I'm just going to adjust my screen here, so grateful for this technology. It's as though technology is right behind consciousness at large, meaning that it's reflective of our interconnection. This technology really seems to be just that we can all, I saw folks from around the world logging on, and that we can all be connected in this virtual way is beautifully reflective, I think, of our inherent interconnection. So thank you. I'd like to begin with the meditation. And I ask that you turn the attention to the breath, please. And that as you do that, just hold somewhere in your consciousness this recognition that fear keeps us from peace. And that fear blocks a direct experience of truth. And in this moment, settle into the experience of letting yourself breathe. In other words, not getting in the way of the process of simply breathing, not attempting to control the breath. Not attempting to control the mind. Giving yourself the opportunity to receive the gift of your own attention. Recognizing that your breath is the way that you're integrating with the universe right now, and that there's no way to do that wrong. So often we take the breath for granted. Let yourself now in this short sit simply enjoy the breath. And for this meditation, release the temptation to discipline the mind. Letting go of the tendency to use meditation as a vehicle for control, an attempt for control. So often our attention is moving outward to object after object after object, to thoughts, perceptions, states of mind. In this meditation, I'm going to ask that you simply allow the attention to sink back into its source being awareness. As you feel the attention move outward, latching onto some object, take that as an invitation. Metaphorically, not turn the attention around and back in, but to simply let the attention sink. Let it relax. Let it rest back into direct experience of its own source awareness. Again, softening your own impulse to discipline, to apply discipline. And in this moment, for this meditation, for this topic of awakening from fear, give yourself completely to the experience of softening and resting. Latching onto objects, you easily forget who you authentically are. You forget what we authentically are. Notice the pull. Move out. And again, receive that as an invitation. Oh yes, thank you. And rest back in. Not from that internal voice of, I should calm down or I should relax, but from an honest response to the call to return home, to awareness. Allow the attention that's constantly moving outward, grasping for happiness or peace, to sink back into awareness, into the true experience for which it longs. Every time you feel the attention move outward into the world of objects, imagine that it's like a young, hungry child, lost, perhaps, searching. Feel the way in which that child is brought home to an experience of resting and warmth and openness and love. As it sinks back into its mother's arms, the open, embracing space of awareness that has room for everything. It is undisturbed by the movements of the mind. It is undisturbed by the movement of the world. and again with gentle inquiry and with love, soft curiosity. Notice where the attention is now. Has it fallen into the habit of moving outward from object to object? If it has, rather than disciplining the child, we remind the child of the open embrace of love in which the attention is welcome to return. Sinking back and in. Resting in awareness. I want to express gratitude for your patience as we sort out some technical issues here. It sounds like the mic is working again now. And if you couldn't hear any of that meditation, just rest in awareness. Okay, thank you. I just got a note that this sounds better now, and I will try to speak a little bit more loudly too. Again, I really do appreciate your patience. This is a new platform for us, and yeah, thank you for bearing with us. Running around in the background as we see if the mic is working correctly. But yeah, of that meditation fell to me. This topic of fear, something I became present to during that meditation, is the way in which, with this image of attention moving outward like a child that is longing for something, searching. It struck me as a strong metaphor to be able to recognize that that child could simply rest back into the home which it's forgotten that it's existing within. And we can use fear as a similar indicator. We're so deeply habituated to resist the experience of fear. Rarely do any of us say that we're excited to have it as an experience. But it can shift things for us when we recognize that the fear is a byproduct of the experience of perceiving ourselves as separate. How's that sound now? Is it coming through okay? I'm going to get some feedback here and make sure. Barnaby, is it working? Okay, thank you. So it's really, it's a game changer when we recognize that fear is a byproduct of the experience of separateness. Fear, in other words, belongs to the ego. The reason I focused on that meditation so much on releasing our temptation to discipline the mind is I know that in my own experience, from a purely wholehearted intention, somewhat gone awry, there's a way in which discipline became a hindrance for me. And the real resolution to any experience I have of fear, I've noticed, is actually much more related to love than discipline. So imagine every time you experience that sense of fear, imagine from a place of play, right? We're making all of this up, but from a place of play, imagine that this is a calling out from somebody who's longing to be held. That the fear is this byproduct of the illusion of separateness. That we can use it as an indicator. Yes, I'm back searching for something. I'm back into the world of objects, the attention moving outward into the world of objects. And the moment we become unconscious of the deep habit to move from object to object to object, what we are unconscious to silently governs us. So we begin to move the way that fear initiates movement. I've also noticed that often fear arises, this byproduct of the ego, arises at the very moment that we're coming closer to that which we most long for. We're coming closer to our own direct experience of recognizing ourselves as awareness. It's as though the fear arises, the ego rears its apparent head to assert separation. In that very moment, rather than resisting or avoiding that experience, things shift when we say yes. And not only yes, but when we allow that fear to be fully experienced. I've noticed when working with others that even the desire to observe fear, from the spiritual terminology of being with it, right? I'm going to be with fear, I'm going to observe it, I'm going to stay with it. But there's a way in which we can fall into a habit of detaching from our experience. Do you know that one? I'm going to observe it, I'm going to be separate from it in a sense, and I'm going to then try to accept it so that it won't bother me anymore. Fortunately, from the perspective of the heart that longs for a full embrace of everything, that is the full embrace of everything. Fortunately, that technique, if you will, doesn't actually work. So in the very moment that we're tempted to move away from the fear, again, even in the guise of I'm going to observe it, play with what happens in your practice as you embrace moving into it, not resisting it, recognizing that that fear is actually a calling out for love. For the deep longing. It's a calling out for the deep longing to be able to rest in awareness, to be able to rest at home. We're also so deeply habituated to take fear very, very seriously. It rarely occurs to us that we can have a playful relationship with fear as it arises. Yes, it's here. Would you like to do something different? Asking from the sincere desire to truly receive and be with in the way that you would fully receive and be with any other experience that your conditioned mind might label as pleasurable, fully moving into. So the play comes in when we recognize that we can watch our attention. We move towards the experience of fear, and then We back away, we become identified with the mind of, I don't want this experience. We become identified with the conditioning that suggests we need to resist. Playfully, lovingly, moving back in. What can allow for this sense of play is also the recognition that on the level of sensation, it's just a sensation. So notice, even in this moment, I'm going to invite you to close your eyes just for a moment here. I'm going to invite you to close your eyes and recognize or imagine, if you will, a time in which you were feeling fear. It might be really fresh. It might be from this morning. See if in this image you can move fully into the experience and recognize where you feel the sensation that you label fear in your body in this moment. Now watch for any subtle ways that you try to move away, that the attention tries to move away from the experience of fear. And again, focusing on fear in this moment as simply a sensation. Move the attention fully into the sensation. Almost from a place of play and gentle curiosity, like an explorer of your own experience. Can you find anything other than strong sensation? Just fully explore this sensation. How big is it? If this sensation had a color, what color would it be? What does it feel like it's made out of? Notice in this moment that you're exploring all of that from your own direct experience of awareness, of being aware. You are not this sensation. You are not this fear. You are not the thoughts that attach to the sensation. Recognize yourself as this open, spacious awareness that's attending to, that's aware of this moment, this experience. And then again, from a place of play, notice how this sensation simply habitually comes with a label assigned by the conditioned mind. So for a moment, consider a time, for example, in which you were excited. See if you can find that sensation, find the center of that excitement. Where is that sensation? Simply explore that now. What is that sensation of excitement occur in the body? What does it feel like? What does it look like? Most importantly, what is it that the sensation of excitement arises within? Turn your attention now to that. With gentle inquiry, explore, is the sensation of fear similar to the sensation of excitement with just different names? But most importantly, can you recognize in this moment the unchanging context of awareness in which these sensations arise? So recognize this fear as just yet another object, like a wave. Like one wave or one current in a vast ocean. Excitement is another wave. It's another current in a vast ocean, surprisingly perhaps similar. Recognize the way in which they're occurring in the same open ocean, vast ocean. And now turn your attention to recognizing yourself as the ocean, knowing yourself as the ocean. So this arising of fear is merely an indicator that we've forgotten that we're the ocean, that we've moved back into perceiving ourselves as the current. But that current cannot exist outside the ocean. The wave cannot exist outside the ocean. We have this great opportunity to rest back into the remembrance of who we are in the very moment that we might feel most afraid, that our attention might be most aligned or identified with an experience of fear. That pathway, again, is not a path of discipline. It's a pathway of love. I just checked in on our time, and it looks as though it's time to transition into some questions and answers about our meditation and discussion today. Before I do that, I've been asked to remind you that this platform happens through the generosity of others. I'm extremely grateful to have the opportunity to be with you all in this way today. And I ask that if you are able to contribute to Worldwide Insight, that you hold in your awareness that that benefits the platform itself, it benefits all the teachers who are invited to work through Worldwide Insight, and hopefully benefits your practice as well as other people's. So thank you for that support. So what shall we talk about in this next bit of time? What are you present to? And I'll check to make sure. It looks like there might be a hand raised, but I'm not sure. Maybe, Jake, if you're still with us, you could send me a note and make sure that I am receiving notes appropriately. Or Barnaby, perhaps you could send one in. I'm not actually seeing the chat feature. Is it working? Okay, great. Oh, great. Okay, I've gotten a test. Wonderful. I'm reminded of the thought that what we fear is the inverse of what we care most deeply about. Thank you for writing in, Heather. Reminded of the thought that what we fear is the inverse of what we care most deeply about. It's an interesting way to look at it, isn't it? Yes. Would we be filled with fear at times in which we had no vested interest? It points to me to that place that we were looking at in the meditation. Excuse me. The recognition that often fear arises in the very moments that we're moving more directly into an experience of recognizing who we authentically are. So, for example, I've fallen in love, and I'm very excited about this union I'm experiencing with a new partner, let's say. Isn't it interesting how the closer I become to this person, the more fear might arise to threaten that deep experience of connection that's occurring? What if this doesn't work out? What if he or she leaves me? What if the relationship isn't sustainable? It's interesting, isn't it, how it often will arise right at the time that we're starting to more fully let go into that space of non-separateness that we experience in love while resting in love. Not a coincidence. Thank you, Heather. Great. Got a question here from Mary. Okay. Again, my iCloud popping at me. All right, let me close that up. Okay, what are some of the tools that we can use to recognize that we are actually experiencing fear? Sometimes fear can come in many disguises, and I have personally recognized that control is one form. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Mary. Tools that I have found helpful in recognizing fear are noticing what's happening in my body. So as we played today with recognizing the sensation that comes with fear, it can be really helpful. I know in my experience, sometimes that's the first indicator for me that fear is on the scene. If it's really strong fear, even a sense of nausea. Another tool that I find incredibly helpful is being able to recognize the self-talk, in particular the negative self-talk. So we know, today I've been talking about playing with this image of the small child who's looking for home, who's lost. So we know that that small child, if we're going to work with this image, is being talked to by the voice of the inner critic or negative self-talk. And when fear is there, it's very hard to have an experience of fear without a voice, an internal voice that threatens. So here is this small child, okay? And here is the voice of, he's going to leave you. I'm going to go back to my image of falling in love and being in a relationship, okay? So here's the voice of, he's going to leave you. You can't count on this. You really shouldn't let go too fully in this. So this is the voice of the inner critic, okay? So is it any surprise to us that this, I'm going to call this the young child within us, experiences fear? They're being tortured inside. In the very moment, the tool that I'm speaking of today, the awareness that I'm referring to, in the very moment that we can recognize the self-talk that brings about, that is this dynamic, we can practice allowing this child, if you will, to rest back into an experience of love. So recognizing the fear, recognizing that negative self-talk can be an excellent way to see, that's the brutal dynamic that I'm engaged in. That's what I got caught in. That's not me. Right. It's one current. It's one wave. I'm the ocean. To pause and remember in that very moment, I can come back to a direct experience of recognizing myself as the ocean. Thank you. I hope that is helpful, Mary. Can you please say more about going into fear versus holding it in awareness? Yes, thank you very much. Dharma Lu. That'd be a great band name, Dharma Lu. I like that. Can you please say more about going into fear versus holding it in awareness? Yes. This is just a particular passion of mine right now in practice, because what I have noticed is that for those of us, I know many people on this call are people who have very active Dharma practices. And for many of us in practice, it's very easy to have holding it in awareness be a way of without meaning to, sort of observe it from afar. We're holding it in awareness, but we're distancing ourselves in a subtle way. Now, that's not always true. And the reason I brought it in this call is because, again, it's a place that I see folks struggle. So you'll look in your own practice to see whether for you the phrase holding it in awareness doesn't feel like it creates that kind of separation. But the reason I'm playing around today with this image of going into fear is it plays with this way in which within practice often we see awareness as outside that which we are being aware of. And the going into is one way to play around with this collapsing that is actually more reflective of what is so. The collapsing is that the very experience of fear itself is comprised of awareness. It arises out of awareness. It is made of awareness. It is known by awareness. So this going into is just one way to play with the way in which there's actually nothing outside that awareness. There is no one to hold something in awareness. Awareness is all of it. It's a much more relaxing place to live when we recognize it's not our job to be aware of fear from some sort of distanced place, needing to tend to it. So when I talk about going into, it's one way to explore the collapse, the recognition that even the fear is comprised of pure consciousness, which for the purposes of this call, I'm going to use interchangeably with awareness. Thank you, Donna Lou. I rarely experience what I consider actual fear, but experience chronic anxiety. It is different in that it is not based on something I'm experiencing. I guess my question is how to experience it directly. From Sharon. Thank you very much, Sharon. Beautiful question. Oh, good, Donna Lou, I'm glad that was helpful. So, I rarely experience what I consider to be actual fear, but experience chronic anxiety. I imagine that many people can relate to that. I think it's one of the reasons I'm so incredibly passionate about working with teenagers. What I've seen by being in high schools is that the average teenager, if they had language for it, would probably describe their everyday experience as a low grade, sometimes higher than low grade, experience of constant anxiety. So we need not get in touch with one specific experience of fear. It's incredibly helpful to be able to recognize there's this constant edge of anxiety that I experience as, and here's the important part, as myself. It becomes so constant and so familiar to us that we really feel as though it's the hallmark of our experience, and we begin to own it and call it ourselves. The thing I find most useful, and I would ask you to play with and consider, is what is it in which that experience of anxiety arises? Another way to come at this is, This anxiety it longs for, right? It's there moving from object to object to object. It longs for what? Remember, you cannot long for something that you haven't experienced. I can't long for the taste of deep, dark chocolate if I haven't tasted it. So don't worry about finding specific experiences of fear. Recognize that that low-grade anxiety is the manifestation of the illusion of separateness. It's the manifestation of feeling outside life somehow, even though that's not actually possible. So I noticed, for example, before this call this morning, I said to my partner, I'm nervous about this experience. I've never had an opportunity to speak to people from outside the room that I'm inside at the moment about practice. And I was aware of the way in which the resolution to that experience of nervousness is in the remembrance that it's in the getting out of the way that what I long for most can be fully available to me, fully received as my direct experience of the moment. That nervousness is simply the small child, if we're going to go with that image from before, the small child here responding to some sort of internal conversation about what could go wrong. The moment we recognize, this drama is a creation. It's not a reflection of what's real. It's not a reflection of our interconnection, the interconnection that's inherent. Is the very moment that we return to the remembrance of that interconnection. And in the remembrance of the interconnection, there's plenty of room for an experience of fear. We need not resist it. We need not avoid it. We need not hate it. We need not make it mean anything, which can be very hard for us. I've been practicing all this time and I'm nervous before a call. What is that about? Right? We don't have to assign those kinds of meanings or values that all have no other function than to keep this experience of separateness alive. That is the only function of those other mechanisms. That's the only purpose. So the moment we can recognize, those functions are simply doing what they do, we can return to our direct experience of truth. That's a wave. Yes. Can I recognize in this moment that wave occurs within a vast ocean, an ocean that is undisturbed by all activities of the ocean, all activities of the mind. Thank you. I hope that was useful, Sharon. Okay, I'm seeing, through Skype, another question has been called to my attention. Okay, I'm flipping screens here. During the holiday season or any time, What is a wise response to Islamophobia or any other fear-based expression from loved ones about recent world events? Thank you. A really excellent question, Brian. Thank you for sending it in. It's so deeply compelling to respond to fear with more fear, isn't it? So one wise response, I believe, is to be able to recognize that we know that place of fear. So rather than seeing fear somewhere and then getting caught in our own fear, in reactivity to that fear, using the fear as a way to recognize our deep interconnection with that experience. I know that fear. I just felt nervousness or fear this morning. I know this place. What we're really talking about when we discuss this is being able to choose love. We're deeply conditioned to believe that if we choose love, that means we won't be standing up for injustices, and that's not my experience at all. It's my experience that from a place of love, that is actually the only context in which transformation can actually occur. So there I am at my holiday dinner with a relative who has very different political views than I do, let's say. What happens when, rather than fearing this person's position, I go to a place of understanding, compassion, and love. And of course, one of the beautiful byproducts of such a practice is that we recognize in this intention, in holding this intention, we are transformed. We are transformed. As we consciously choose to meet fear with love. Another way to look at this is that we're not doing anything different with this person on the outside than we're talking about practicing internally here. The fear arises. It's an indication of some form of delusion, a distortion of the truth. Can I allow it to rest back into an experience of myself being awareness? Now, can I apply that same loving approach to what I think of, what my conditioned mind calls other people? Can I recognize, there's some form of distortion. How do I know? That person's consumed by their own homophobia, name the fear, right? They're consumed by their own fear. Can I be knowingly the awareness that that fear, that sense of separateness actually is longing for? It wouldn't be arising otherwise. Thank you so much, Brian. Does Buddhist psychology speak to our conditioning from past traumas and whether exploration can sometimes lead to a kind of healing understanding? Does Buddhist psychology speak to our conditioning from past traumas and whether exploration can sometimes lead to a kind of healing understanding? Well, first, I would like to, I see this is from Dharmalu again. Thank you for writing in again, Dharmalu. Hello again. First, I would like to make it clear that I can't say I know anything about Buddhist psychology, so that lets me off the hook entirely. I don't know much about it. But what I do find very, very helpful is an exploration of our own conditioning, not from the perspective of therapy, not from the distortion or the illusion that there's something we need to fix or change, not that there's something that we need to heal, not that we don't need to fix anything that's broken. But I find it very useful to have as part of our practice an awareness of our various activities, all that arise out of the conditioned mind, all that arise from within the conditioned mind, I could say. I find this so useful because we like to think that we're extremely complicated. Now, in this moment, I'm speaking about we as the representation of the conditioned mind. So you'll notice in this call, I've gone from recognizing ourselves as awareness, and in this moment, I'm referring to we, this conglomeration of conditioned processes. When we're identified with those processes, we like to believe that we're very complicated. Actually, our processes are repetitive, habitual, and work somewhat like clockwork. In an odd way, you can rely on them. Okay, how strange would it be to wake up in the morning and have somebody else's conditioned structures and processes that you're suddenly caught within? I've always thought it would be an incredible experiment if we could do that. It would be wonderful, delightful place to play and explore. But in fact, we through practice can become very familiar with the patterns of our own mind. So it is from this perspective that I find it helpful to be able to see. So if we go back to the wave in the ocean, for example, we could see, at about 4 o'clock every day, there's this one particular wave that forms in this particular way. And as it forms, it's very compelling to me. When it forms, I believe I'm it. So I am suddenly this resistance, or I am suddenly this fear. If I'm able to see, not from a heady place of picking things apart, but if I'm able to simply recognize, that's that process. That's that old habit. Then I'm seeing that from the perspective of the ocean. I'm not identified with believing that process or that pattern or that habit is me. And that is extremely useful and valuable. So again, it would be confusing for us if our processes weren't processes, if they weren't cycles and patterns, but they are. All conditioned processes are processes. We tend to miss that because we get confused by the content, but the process repeats. Content can be changing. New car, new house, new partner. Okay. Thank you so much. I just got note that we have time for one more question, and the question I've been asked to address is the question from Jeffrey. Let's see if I can find it right here. I see that it popped up a second ago. Is fear always an illusion of separation? It's a wonderful, wonderful and rich place to explore. I see that we're 1 minute until, and believe it or not, it's actually hard to address that question from the perspective of always within 1 minute. So what I would like to do, and I believe I know who this Jeffrey is, and so fortunately we can talk about this more in person. I'd like you to explore your direct experience of that question from an open and loving and curious place. So rather than coming to a conclusion about always or never, find out when you experience fear, whether you're identified with that small current or that small wave experience rather than the ocean. And in another call, I'd love to address more fully why it can be tricky once we go into the world of always. It has to do with the way in which the conditioned mind loves to make rules and then set up conditioned structures that react to those rules, leading to suffering. So thank you, Jeffrey. I see that it is 12:30, and I just wanted to, again, thank you so much. And say that I'm particularly honored that I will be offering a course called Awakening to the New Year in January through Realize Media, and that I hope that you will be able to join me in this way for that month-long course in January, and that I invite you to check out peaceinschools.org and onehustlepeace.org if you'd like to know about what we're doing here in Portland, Oregon, and beyond. Again, thank you in this time for showing up and for choosing practice and compassion and love. Thank you.